I am Dana Winters. I am the Rita McGinley Chair of Early Learning and Children's Media at the Fred Rogers Center. So the Children's Studies minor is an interdisciplinary minor that explores the needs of children. When you're graduating, I teach the project in Children's Studies, which is the culminating project. It's an independent study. It's a 1-credit course. Typically, students will write reflective papers thinking about the courses that they've taken, how that applies to practical experience they've had working with children. Others take a far more creative approach to it. We've gotten art projects and beautiful videos of students' times in Children's Studies minor. So it's really a wide open understanding of how the Children's Studies minor has been helpful and what students hope to do with that learning.
And that's where I come in. For my Children's Studies capstone project, I wanted to reflect on the time that I'd spent in this program, but I didn't want to do it by myself. As much as I love talking to the camera, I didn't want it to be all about that. One of the biggest things I've taken away from the Children's Studies minor is how important human interaction is, for children and for all of us. So I really wanted that to be a component of my final project. So I've decided to talk to some of the faculty that I've gotten to know over the 4 years in the program, as long as some alumni who graduated a few years before me, to see what they had to say to help me reflect on my time in the program. So let's take a look at what those folks have to say, shall we? The interdisciplinary nature of the minor is so vital to its success because we get to look at children's studies from a variety of different lenses. I wanted to make sure that I talked to professors from a variety of different departments.
It's a 2-credit survey of what we can do in service of children. So there's an historical component where we think a little bit more about the histories of childhood, but there's also very much a practice focus where we look at maybe formal positions that aren't teaching or counseling that you can do to work with children.
Yeah, the course is a kind of historical overview of a bunch of thinkers within the Christian tradition and their view of children and how it moves through time. It's sort of funny because it starts with Jesus, who's great and wonderful, and welcome the children unto me, and then it's this history of looking at children suffering from original sin and being sort of corrupt to like this really sort of dark period, and then a kind of a turnaround that you start to see as we get closer to contemporary society, building back up and being more sort of positive. And most of the time we end near Mr. Rogers, which has a very wonderful view of children that it's probably the closest to Jesus we get in the course.
Childhood history is a big and growing subfield of history. So we're very interested in the question of childhood, in part because we see childhood as, it's a biological experience for sure, so there's certain biological things that people go through. But childhood is a social and cultural construction, and it wasn't really, and it's changed over time, so it's contingent. It's not been the same for people today as it was 100 years ago, and it wasn't the same 100 years ago as it was 200 years ago, and that this whole notion of childhood, what it means and how children ought to live and what a good life is, all of that changes over time. I knew it was a rich area, and it has proven to be, and I knew some of the big questions and issues that I was going to address: child labor, education, how do we approach teaching of children, formal teaching of children.
Actually, I really like teaching child development. I think it's one of my favorite classes to teach. And I think it's really important for students who are pursuing a child studies minor to understand, the typical patterns of how children change over time, and that those are also based on group averages, but there's always, you have to look at idiographic development too, and how individual children may not fit exactly within those patterns. And it also normalizes, hopefully, a lot of child behaviors, that there's just certain things that, whether it's due to cognitive development or social experience, that are very typical.
Sydney and I are such high achieving perfectionist snobs, we had to do it. So we elected that, heck yeah, we were going to do the children's studies minor, not really knowing what all it meant, but we knew like it would give us more experience and more knowledge in a specific niche of what we were hoping to practice in our futures. And we knew that it was rooted in the idea of how we can better treat humans and have our work in the future mean something to somebody in the long run.
Three of us found out that we were all going to do it, it sealed the deal even more, because we're like,
we were all in at that point.
Yeah.
I would say that the most salient thing that Dr. King taught me is the power of perspective, because you can create one work and it can be perceived in innumerable ways due to what people bring to the table.
Yeah, I think that is 100% the case, and that's like one of my favorite parts of that book, actually, how Fred considered what he called the space between the television and the viewer as holy ground. It's really something that has stayed with me. The majority of my job is communicating with other people and sending emails or Teams messages or different things like that. And so even if I need something that they should have given me 3 weeks ago or whatever, you don't know what's going on behind that person, and that space between email to email or Teams message to Teams message is this space that should be respected as like what's going on in your life to what's going on in their life, and you don't know how those connect, so you need to make sure that you're very conscious of your words and how you're interacting with those people. And so those are things that you wouldn't think you'd get from a theology of children class, and how that relates to my job as a corporate news project coordinator for graphics. But there you go, the magic of Fred, the magic of children's studies, the magic of Dr. King. There we go.
Yep, it's everywhere.
But when you really look at what it comes down to optimize child development, it's relationships. So it's having communication with children, those small, meaningful interactions, and having healthy relationships with children. And that's what leads to good, positive cognitive growth, good social skills. What I really want students to leave a child with is understanding that healthy relationship piece, because that's what really helps children develop cognitively, socially, emotionally. And, I talk a lot about attachment throughout the class, but in order to have a healthy attachment, it's the adult being as healthy as they can and doing what they need to be as psychologically healthy. And you don't need anything, kind of special to have a good relationship with a child. You just have to care and listen. And that's associated with a host of other positive outcomes.
The main thing that I hope that they take from it is that how you view children has impacts on how you act in the world as a parent, as a teacher, as a coach. Like kids, lots of the Pee Wee leagues are volunteer parents that sort of coach, or any kind of profession that's in there. Like if you have one of the big themes in the course is that if you have a real negative view of children, you end up being much harsher with them. And I'm trying to not have that be a reality. And then if you have a more positive view of children, you have more constructive approaches and stuff that builds them up and helps them to sort of flourish. So getting them to think a little bit about what they bring into their interactions with children and how that starts shaping their behaviors. My Fred Rogers influence on me, his phrase about success is like three rules to success: be kind, be kind, be kind. And I feel like if you can sort of take that into any interactions with children, they tend to flourish a little bit better. So that's I keep pushing.
Well, I hope that they'll understand that the childhood is a social and cultural construction. I mean, it's a biological, for sure, but societies determine what childhood is, and so there's that. The second part is, I think that children are uniquely vulnerable in our society, and so I think that we need to be cognizant of the ways that we can cause harm to children and the ways we can avoid that, and the ways that we can enrich children's lives. I think people like children in general. I rarely get somebody in the class who says, I hate children, but I'm taking this class, it just doesn't happen. And so there are a lot of people who want to be teachers, or they want to work in children's media, or they want to do something with children. And so this is a way to help them be better at the kinds of support that they already want to provide to children.
I think my hope for students is that they take away an understanding of childhood broader than their own lived experience. I think oftentimes that's what we know about childhood, and so we base all of our understandings of other people from our own lived experience, which is perfectly natural and normal. But I would love to broaden that view a little bit. So I would hope that they would walk away with a broader perspective, and also some ideas that they can put into their own relevant work about how they can best meet the needs of children and young people.
It's everywhere. It is
Yeah, literally everywhere.
And I don't, not that I've become like judgmental, I've just become insightful about everything and highly intentional. Like, I don't even know how to describe it, from the smallest things of gender marketing towards children of different genders to things of the sort of watching interactions between caregivers and children in public spaces. Everything you learn, they're all these separate disciplines, and then once you leave Saint Vincent and undergraduate life, you see it all come into this one cohesive package of like children and like people, and it is everywhere. And the greatest thing about the minor and having it and moving on from the liberal arts college is that it's every aspect, which is why it's everywhere. It's the history, it's the sports, it's the psychology, it's the media. It is everywhere.
Yeah, it really is. And that's just because like everyone was a child. And so it just really highlights how impactful that time in our life really is. And so like going on day-to-day life, like you want to be as impactful as you can to these children in the most positive way. So even if it's like just a little smile at a grocery store or like helping a little kid out, like those things matter. Like it just really showcases how much it does matter. And
The biggest overarching theme that the minor taught me, due to the nature of child psychology and child development and human development, it's taught me to take a second and take a step back and ask two questions. What happened to you? And what is the goal of your action? That's it. It is those two simple questions can change everything for how you interact with somebody or yourself. That's what I'll say.
One thing I've really learned about myself and come to realize this year is that I am nothing if not a creator. And one of the things that I love to do is document that process, even if it never gets to see the light of day. But in my ramblings in front of the camera, I had some pretty cool realizations about the minor, what it meant to me, and what I'm going to take away from it. So if you see me looking all disheveled, like maybe right now, that's because that is me a little bit behind the scenes. So how can I conclude it? And I won't know until I do it, but I do want to jot down some thoughts. Minor equals good. I want to get that across. Minor equals good. It's, again, borrow the words of Fred Rogers, I care deeply about children, and so it's a passion of mine, and the fact that I got to sit in these classes for 15 weeks at a time was really such a blessing. I got to sit in these classrooms learning about things that mattered to me, that I cared about, and not only was it fulfilling and entertaining and a positive experience, it was something that was growing my knowledge, growing my skill set. I got to put all these things and these little nuggets of wisdom into my toolbox that I can carry with me into my life. And what's so cool about and kind of different about the children's studies minor is these are things that I'm never not gonna need to know these things. But I have a little bit of an advantage knowing these little pieces of this really vast puzzle, because in life you're always going to have an impact on children's lives. It can be your nieces or your nephews, it can be your neighbors, it can be your own children, and everything you do is going to affect children because they're a vital part of the community. You know, that's something that might not have always been recognized. You know, we had this idea, and that came up in pretty much all of my classes, that it used to be like child equals mini adult equals not ready equals wait until you're an adult and then we'll listen to you. But children are already such a vital piece of the community, and that's something that Fred really emphasized, was that children are valuable right now and they have something to contribute. And so whatever you contribute to the world, what you're doing is affecting children because they're everywhere. They were you, you know? And so when we're looking at children, we're really studying the past, the present, and the future, because you were a child. Children have such a rich history. That's why we learned about it. So much happened. Like I said, there was such a societal shift of how we view children. But there's kids, you know, next door. There's schools in every community. There's, you know, children are all around you. Not in a creepy way. And it's a cliche, but children are the future. And not only are we raising that next generation of leaders and entrepreneurs and go-getters and what have yous, but there are going to be children in the future too. So it's such a cool little group, because every cross-section that you take, there are people who were children, people who are having children, and children. They're everywhere, and in all stages of life, they're in every little man. So it's just like really interesting to be learning about something that relates to everything. Because, you know, I go sit down in my earth science class and I learn about cross sections and I learn about slate and I learn about all these really cool things. And you know, people might be like, oh, I'm not going to use this. This isn't my subject. But it's good to learn it. But when you're learning about children, even if that's not your discipline, it's going to come up. It kind of has to. And I haven't used Pythagorean's theorem in years. I hope to never use it again. But just these little things about, you know, having kind of a hold on how a child develops and knowing how, you know, violence on television can impact kids. It's just like these little things, like, they're gonna come up and you might avoid them, like you might never notice them, but by taking the minor and by learning about it and gaining this cool, very important information, you're more attuned to find those things and to be conscious of them and hopefully to help in some way. So, you know, making the world a better place for kids. That's what we all should do. Because the other thing that I learned in the minor is that what children are going through are just things that we're all, like, they're humans. Children are, breakthrough, newsflash, children are humans. I was reading all these things and it was like, oh, like, this is how a child feels and what they're going through and how they're experiencing it. And I'm like, what do you mean a child? Like, I'm supposedly an adult and I feel all these things. And children are so relatable. And, you know, by learning about children, not even like, even in just a very broad, not even like an experience or whatever, just very broad, here's, you know, how human development, you know? You learn about you, and it's kind of scary sometimes because, like, you see yourself a little bit too closely. I never saw myself in math class. I didn't even want to be in math class. So it's like you're learning about these things that really pertain to you, and it really just kind of opens your eyes, you know, learning about resilience and, you know. So it really is a hodgepodge of all these different things. But it's so cool, and I think such a privilege that your eyes are opened to just how big of a topic children can be and should be. You know? I don't think I could conclude a senior project if I didn't quote Fred Rogers. So, let me just leave you with this. Often when you think you're at the end of something, you're at the beginning of something else. My time at Saint Vincent College has been absolutely life-changing. I can't wait to see how this minor impacts my life, because it's gonna come in, because it's part of me now. I'm gonna bring it to work with me every day. I'm gonna bring it to every barbecue I attend. Barbecue is a weird, normal person activity to choose, but I'm going with it. Every barbecue I attend, the children's studies minor is gonna be there with me. If I'm so blessed as to have children, I feel so much more qualified, but it all just boils down to caring. To show children that they're loved and capable of loving. Another Fred quote, I'm sorry, I'm a machine. My name is Lily McCormick. I graduated from Saint Vincent College in the spring of 2021 with a minor in children's studies, and I'm better off because of it. Thanks for watching.